Peace be upon you. So, a common argument traditionalists make for the justification of Hadith is that the Hadith supposedly gives context to the revelation. Now, we looked at this in a previous episode. We saw that the Asbab Nuzul, the contextual Hadith, it only accounts for about 10%, if not less, of the Quranic verses. Then, in addition, most of these are not considered even authentic and they're highly contradictory. So I want to look at one specific narration that has just become common folklore that people point to try to, again, justify the hadith. And this has to do with the supposed way that the prophet received the first revelation, Surah 96, Al-Alaq. And what's interesting is, even if you look at the hadith corpus, there's a debate regarding what the exact first revelation is. Some of the Sahih hadith say that it's Surah 74, other ones say that it's Surah 96. But what I'm going to read from is this is from Bukhari. This is Sahih Bukhari, number 3. And I'm going to start from beginning and just to the point where it's talking about the context of this revelation. It says, narrated Aisha, the commencement of the divine inspiration to Allah's messenger was in the form of a good dreams, which came true like bright daylight. And then the love of seclusion was bestowed upon him. He used to go in seclusion in the cave of Hira, where he would used to worship Allah continuously for many days before his desire to see his family. He used to take with him the journey food for the stay, and then come back to Khadija, his wife, to take his food likewise again till suddenly the truth descended upon him while he was in the cave of Hira. So to summarize here, he's spending nights in the cave of Hira. He goes there in seclusion, and he has good dreams. And he's receiving, it seems like, some truth. That's all it says. And then it continues. It says, the angel came to him and asked him to read. The prophet replied, I'm not a reciter. And the word here is qara. Qara can mean either a reciter or reader, basically reciting something out loud from some written text. The prophet added, the angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it any more. He then released me and again asked me to read, and I replied, I'm not a reciter. Thereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it any more. He then released me and again asked me to read, but again I replied, I'm not a reciter. Thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me, then released me and said, read in the name of your Lord who has created man from a clot, read, and your Lord is the most generous. So this is the hadith. I'm reading the translation from sunnah.com. And this narration is prolific. Most people are familiar with this. Even if they're not Muslim, they've heard this story. But what's fascinating is there is another individual who existed in the same time period in the 7th century. And this individual, his name is Cædmon. And he's often regarded as the first English poet. The story of Cædmon comes to us in the book entitled Ecclesiastical History of the English People, and it's written by Venerable Bede. Now, according to Bede, Cædmon was an illiterate herdsman who worked at the monastery. He had no formal training in poetry or music and was shy about singing or composing. During feasts at the monastery, it was customary for people to entertain each other with songs and music. Cædmon, feeling unskilled and ashamed of his inability to sing, would often leave the hall when it was his turn to perform. And then one night, after leaving the feast, Cædmon went to the stables to care for the animals. While there, he fell asleep and had a remarkable dream. In the dream, an angelic figure appeared to him and asked him to sing. Cædmon protested, saying he could not sing. But the figure insisted. When Cædmon asked what he should sing about, the figure told him to sing about the creation of the world. So in this dream, Cædmon composes a hymn praising God as the creator of the heaven and the earth. And upon waking, he remembered the hymn and found that he could compose religious songs. So let's read this passage. So this is a translation from Bede's Ecclesiastical History, Book 4, Chapter 24. It reads, there was an abbess monastery, a certain brother especially marked by the grace of God, so that he was accustomed to make fitting songs for the glory of God out of the sacred scripture. Whatever he learned of the Holy Scripture with the aid of interpreters, he quickly turned into the sweetest and most moving poetry in his own tongue, which was English. By his songs, the minds of many were often inspired to despise the world and aspire to the heavenly things. Others after him tried to compose religious poems, but none could compare with him, for he did not learn the art of poetry from men, but from God. For this reason, he could never compose any vain or profane songs, but only those which were concerned with religion suited his religious tongue. So it's giving you kind of an introduction to who this Cædmon character is. So now it's going to give his backstory. It continues. It says, he had lived as a layman until well advanced in years, and had never learned anything about poetry. For this reason, sometimes at feasts, when all took turns singing to the accompaniment of the harp for the sake of entertainment, he would get up from the table and go home when he saw the harp approaching him, for he could not sing. One day he left the feast in this way and went out to the stable, where it was his turn to look after the beast that night. There, when he had lain down and fallen asleep, someone appeared to him in a dream and greeted him, calling him by name, and said, Cædmon, sing me something. He answered, I cannot sing. That is why I left the feast and came here. The one who spoke to him said again, but you shall sing to me. What shall I sing? He replied. Sing about the beginning of the created things and the heavenly voice. At once he began to sing verses in praise of God, the Creator, that he had never heard before. And their theme ran thus. Now we ought to praise the Maker of the heavenly kingdom, the power of the Creator and his purpose, the deeds of the Father of glory. He made the beginning of each and every created thing, the heavenly kingdom as a roof for the children of men, and then the earth beneath to their dwelling place. That is the general sense, but not the actual words which he sang in his dream. For however excellent they may be, no translation can do full justice to the beauty of the original. Now the parallels between the story of Cædmon, who's this illiterate herdsman, who is incapable of singing until an angel, an angelic figure came to him and asked him to sing, and he said, I can't sing. And then when he was asked again, he said, what shall I sing? The uncanny similarities between that and the narration that we find in Bukhari and even in older narrations is very obvious. So let's look at some of these parallels. Both were ordinary individuals. Both Cædmon and Muhammad are attributed by traditions as illiterate herdsmen. And we read in Muslim 2050 that it claims that Muhammad was a herdsman. He says all the prophets were herdsmen. But initially, both of them resisted or expressed inability to fulfill the divine command when prompted. Cædmon was commanded to sing in a dream by a divine figure, while Muhammad was told to read or recite by the angel Gabriel. Now, what's interesting is between singing and reciting, those words are almost synonymous. In addition, both cases, the command was repeated multiple times, accompanied by a sense of intense pressure. Cædmon felt compelled despite his perceived inability, and Muhammad was physically pressed to the point of great discomfort. After their experiences, both men emerged transformed, possessing a unique ability to convey divine messages in what people perceived as a form of poetry. Cædmon began composing sacred poetry in praise of God's creation, while Muhammad began to receive and recite the Quranic revelations. What's interesting is if we go to earlier accounts, or what's ascribed to earlier accounts, in regards to the Hadith narration, if we go to the biography of the Prophet, written originally by Ibn Asag, but then transmitted by Ibn Hisham, and as we'll see, it's actually much later than that, it uses the same terminology. He says, I'm not a reciter, and then it asks, what shall I read? Just like it does in the case of Cædmon. Now, there's another interesting parallel regarding this request to sing about the beginning of the created things, which we see in the story of Cædmon. The revelation following the first revelation of Surah 96 is understood to be Al-Qalam, Surah 68. And it reads, Noon the pen and what they, the people, write. And if you go to the most revered tafsir of many Sunnis, that of Ibn Kathir, regarding the meaning of this verse, it goes into the following narration, paralleling this verse with the beginning of what they ascribe to the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth. So again, we're seeing another parallel between the Cædmon story, hey, write about the beginning of all created things, and then, this being the second revelation that they ascribe Nun and what the people write in regards to God writing the creation of everything that's going to happen. So let's read from this tafsir of 68.1 from Ibn Kathir. And I'm going to jump to the portion where it's the content. It says, the first thing that Allah created is the pen. It said, what do I write? Allah said, write the fate of the existence of all that will happen from this day until the day of judgment. Then Allah created the whale, Nun, and raised the mist of the water and rent it from the sky and spread the earth on the back of the whale, this Nun. The whale was disturbed and the earth was extended and the earth was fixed in the place with the mountains. Verily, they are the pride of Allah upon the earth. So let's put this concept aside that Ibn Kathir is claiming that the earth is sitting on top of a giant whale. It's interesting that they're ascribing this verse to the beginning of the creation of all things, similar to what was given to Caedmon, saying, sing about the beginning of created things. So now the big question is, which one came first? Did this narration about the prophet and the cave of Hira come first, or did the story of Caedmon receiving his sacred songs come first? Now, historically, it's understood that Prophet Muhammad was born in the year 570. He received the revelation in the year 610. But the earliest account of this narration of how the prophet supposedly received this first divine revelation can be found in the Sirat Rasulullah. So this is the life or the biography of the prophet. And this was initially supposedly written by the biographer Ibn Asaq. And Ibn Asaq died in the year 767. However, we don't have Ibn Asaq's original work. What we have is a version transmitted by Ibn Hisham, who died in 833, some 60 years after the death of Ibn Asaq. Now you say, okay, so now would that technically put the date as 833? It's actually worse than that. The oldest known manuscript of Ibn Hisham, Sirat Rasulullah, the biography of the Prophet, is a papyrus labeled Perf number 665. Now this manuscript, it's only one page, it's 11 by 13 centimeters, and it contains 16 lines of Ibn Hisham's narration. And they date this manuscript to the 9th century, so about 300 years, give or take, after the death of the Prophet, suggesting that it was transcribed by Ibn Hisham shortly after his death in 834. Yet this is only a single page of the entire biography and does not contain the account we were interested in. So historically, we know that this Sirat was in circulation, but the actual compiling of it we have today, it did not occur until, get this, around the year 1858 to 1860. And this was done by the German Orientalist Ferdinand Wustenfeld. And he compiled all the different manuscripts that he could find for Ibn Hisham. And this is the version we use today. So this book, as far as I can tell, looking at, online, it wasn't even compiled until the 19th century. So this narration, it's also found in Bukhari. So it's not just that, hey, we're going to Ibn Hisham. That's considered the oldest narration that I could find of this story. But if you go to Bukhari, so Bukhari died in the year 870, and his Sahih compilation was believed to be written around the year 850. But the challenge is, the earliest copy of a Bukhari we have is a partial manuscript dated to the year 1017, and it only contains books 65 through 69, with 65 being incomplete. As this is in the first book of Bukhari, it doesn't contain this narration. So the oldest complete manuscript of Bukhari that contains this narration, it's dated to the year 1155, roughly 550 years after Hijri. So this isn't looking too great for the Hadith narration regarding this first revelation. Even if we say that it's Ibn Asaq died in the year 767, and it was Ibn Hisham who transmitted this in 833, which Ibn Hisham died, but the text itself, we can't even attest to, if we're going down that path, until the 19th century. And then if we're looking at Bukhari, again, the oldest manuscript that we can have for this specific narration is dated to the year 1155. So now let's compare this to the dating of Cædmon. So Caedmon is thought to have lived in the 7th century, and his divine vision likely occurred sometimes in the later part of the century. The monastery, Whitby, where Caedmon worked and later lived as a monk, was founded in the year 657 under the abbess St. Hilda. The events surrounding Caedmon's life likely took place during Hilda's tenure as abbess, which ended with her death in the year 680. This places the time of Caedmon's vision and subsequent poetic output before the date, most likely in the years 660 and 670. Now, the earliest and most authoritative account of Caedmon's story is found in the Ecclesiastical History of the English People by Venerable Bede, and it was completed in the year 731. And this is the passage that we read earlier. Bede, a monk and historian, relied on earlier oral traditions and written records to compile his account. Although Bede himself never met Caedmon, his work preserves what was known about Caedmon a few decades after his death. So this is, again, similar to the Hadith narration, an oral narration that is documented to be written in the year 731. Now, do we have any manuscripts confirming this? Because we already looked, and when it came to the Hadith manuscripts, we're not able to locate one before the year 1055. So the oldest known manuscript of Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People is in More Bede, housed at Cambridge University Library under the shelf mark MSKK 5.16. This manuscript is believed to have been produced around the year 737, within a few years of Bede's death in 735. Scholars suggest it may have been copied at Bede's own monastery in Wearmouth or Jarrow, making it a near contemporary witness to his work. And another significant early manuscript is in the St. Petersburg Bede, held in the National Library of Russia. This manuscript is traditionally dated between 731 and 746. Based on marginal notes known as the memoranda, while the exact dating is debated, it is generally considered to have been copied not long after Bede completed his work. Additionally, there is a third manuscript called Tiberius Bede, and this one is dated to the 8th century. So now we have three manuscripts. One is dated around the year 737, the other one is dated between 731 and 746, and the third one, which just gives the date of the 8th century. All three of these manuscripts, they predate the Hadith narrations when they were supposedly compiled. Even if we grant Ibn Asakh died in the year 767, let's say he wrote his manuscript in the year 750, that's still before the manuscripts that we have for the Caedmon story. Because one manuscript is dated to the year 737, and the other one is dated to the year 731 through 746. So it still predates even Ibn Asakh's supposed compilation of the biography of the Prophet. Now, the reality is, we don't have his narration. No one claims to have it. What they have is a narration from Ibn Hisham, who died in the year 833. So roughly 100 years after the documented proof we have of the Caedmon story. But it's even worse than that, because any actual verifiable manuscript of the Hadith narration doesn't even show up until the turn of the millennium. So these are hundreds of years gap where we can attest that, yes, this one was significant to the point that they have preserved copies. The other ones, we don't. And given the striking similarities between the two narratives, both featuring an unlearned figure who initially resists a divine command to sing or to recite, only to receive a transformative ability through divine intervention, it is natural to question the origins and connections between these two stories. There are three primary possibilities to explain these parallels. The first is that it's just a coincidence. There's nothing to see here. We're reading too much into this. It just happens that they both followed the similar archetype, but it's just purely a coincidence. You have two stories that mirror each other, but there is no relation behind them. That's one option. The other option is that the story of Caedmon was influenced by the story of Muhammad. Except this doesn't seem too likely, as the historical account shows that we have earlier attestations to the Caedmon story than we do regarding the narration towards the prophet. That's not likely. The third possibility is that the story of Caedmon, recorded and disseminated across Christendom through Bede's widely read ecclesiastical history, reached the regions of Arabia and influenced the narrators of Muhammad's story during the development of the Sirah. This is the most plausible of the three scenarios, given the widespread cultural and theological exchanges between the Christian and emerging Islamic worlds in the late antique period. Also, we have to ask, why did it take the Muslims 100 years to write the first biography of the Prophet? If this individual was so influential that they had to mimic his life and his mannerisms, you would think someone would have taken on this task earlier. What I'm speculating is that yes, someone wanted to take on this task. It happened to be 100 years after the Prophet's death. He needed to fill the gaps in these pieces of the Prophet's life that he didn't know. So he's treating this as a form of literature. He's not treating this as if these are actual historical accounts, despite the fact of citing isnads like Bukhari does. These are just folklore that are being made about the Prophet. And what they saw is that, hey, there's this compelling story about Caedmon. To him, they're like, how are the Arabs ever going to know about this? Yeah, we'll plagiarize from him, reincorporate it for the Prophet, and then say that this is our origin story. Now, the historical timeline and the manuscript evidence overwhelmingly favor the third possibility, that the authors of the Sirah most likely drew inspiration directly or indirectly from the story of Caedmon. Bede's ecclesiastical history was a foundational text in the Christian world, widely copied and distributed, making its stories accessible to many regions through trade, conquest, and intellectual exchange. So most likely, the story of Caedmon influenced the propagators of the biography of the prophet. And this was happening during the specific period of the 8th and 9th centuries, where you have historians attempting to rewrite and inform the masses regarding the backstories to what took place. These are not reliable accounts. This historical precedence challenges the notion of coincidence and the possibility that it was the other way around, that it was the story of Muhammad that influenced this tale regarding Caedmon. But realistically, for all intents and purposes, it's oddly suspicious that at the same time period, regarding two individuals in the same archetype, have the exact same similar narration. One of them clearly must be plagiarizing from the other. And as we saw from the historical evidence and from the manuscript evidence, that most likely it was the biographers that plagiarized this story from the Christians and infused it inside their religion. And in all honesty, when you read the Hadith corpus and you see how much of it is inundated with Christian theology, with Jewish Talmud theology, it's not a surprise that they would take this story as well and attribute it to the Prophet. God willing, we're going to end there. If you guys want to get in contact, you want to have a discussion of sorts or meet like-minded people, please join us on our Discord server. The invite link is below. If you want a better understanding of the verses of the Quran, please download the Quran Study app. It goes through word by word each of the Arabic words, its corresponding roots, and you can see how it's used throughout the entire Quran as a concordance. If you don't have an iOS device, you can go to QuranStudyApp.com website. You have pretty much the same functionality as what you get from the app. Some of it is missing, but all in all, informationally, it's about the same. And if you want to get notes from today's discussion or other topics, you can go to Quran Talk blog. And lastly, if you want to get more regular updates, you can follow me on X or Twitter at Talk Quran. And until next time, peace and God bless.